Hello everyone, you're listening to The Crime Room, a true crime podcast about how homicide detectives catch bad guys.
Because the road from innocent to guilty is never a straightforward line. The reality is that some bad people are really good at telling lies, and that some good people are really bad at telling the truth.
I'm Jolene Grace, a murder mystery novelist and your co-host.
And I'm Branden, a law enforcement supervisor with over 10 years of police experience.
Let's talk crime.
Let's talk crime.
Welcome back. Wow, what a ride it has been. We have so much to unpack in this episode as we move to wrap things with Alex Murdaugh as we explore his trial on this episode of The Crime Room. In episode 1, we'll listen to the 911 tapes he made after he discovered Paul and Maggie shot multiple times at the family estate Moselle. And in the second part of the Alex Murdaugh series, we examine the interviews he gave to SLED, the South Carolina highest law enforcement authority.
If you're new to the series, welcome. We're so glad you're joining us. You can find all of our episodes on demand at our website, thecrimeroom.com. Or you can find the Crime Room podcast at any platform you'd like.
And before we dive into tonight's episode, please like and subscribe to our show. It helps us so much. And make sure to leave us a comment in the comment section and tell us what you would like to hear on the podcast next. We'd love to know. And now, with all that out of the way, let's talk crime. Let's talk Alex Murdaugh on trial for the double murder of his son Paul and wife Maggie, shot multiple times with 2 different weapons on a hot South Carolina summer night.
We made it. We made it to the trial. Alex Murdaugh has officially been arrested and charged with 2 counts of homicide. At his third and last interrogation, detectives confronted Alec with physical evidence he could not deny.
He tried to.
Yeah, he did, but he wasn't very good at it.
Tell us some more about the police protocol when someone gets booked in jail, especially someone like him. I'm assuming he won't be getting an extra pillow for being Alex Murdaugh, right? If he ever got any preferential treatment before his arrest, that's all gone.
So pretty much he's going to be treated like any other person in there. There are certain special classes that will get solitary or special confinement because they will be at risk of other inmates hurting them. However, I do not believe Alex Murdaugh would have had any of those. I won't call them special privileges, but I don't think Alex Murdaugh will have any of those precautions used on him. So no special privileges. He's going to be booked, fingerprinted, tossed down to the jail or prison, and wait the next court date.
So, what I've always found interesting is your job as a detective is not done and over when you send somebody to jail. It actually continues and goes on. After you make the arrest and the charges, you have to prep for a trial, you have to testify and explain the investigation. Before we talk about Alex Murdaugh and examine the arguments presented by defense and prosecution, I think you should explain to us some of the court rules.
Yeah, so these are important. Not everybody understands that there are a bunch of rules in which both the defense and the prosecutor have to follow. First and foremost, which is probably the most important, is if it is your witness, you ask the questions first. Then the other side, either the defense or the prosecutor, will have a chance to cross, and then it goes back to the original one last time, where they can only really talk about what's already been said. And with that, the prosecutor cannot make the defendant testify. So they have a Fifth Amendment right, constitutional right, to not self-incriminate. And this is important because, as you will see in this case, or if you have already watched it, he goes last, he talks last, he testifies last, which means that he now has the whole timeline that was presented before him. He has all the evidence that the prosecutor has put forward to the jury, so he can kind of maneuver around each thing, or attempt to sway the jury in his favor.
Right on. So by the time we release this episode, we should have our short YouTube videos on search warrants up and posted. It's very helpful and handy to know what the scope of warrants are. The PDF for that's already on thecrimeroom.com. If you want to get it, it's free for you, or you can watch the videos on YouTube, whatever you prefer. And the reason I'm bringing up search warrants is because whatever is collected through a warrant can be presented in trial, excluding motions filed by the defense and granted by the presiding judge. And in this case, in Alex Murdaugh case, the defense scored some points to their advantage with that.
Right. Here's the thing about trials. And again, the defendant doesn't have to prove himself innocent. It is on the burden of the prosecutor to show that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And what that means is that all 12 jurors have to find him guilty. If one juror is unsure or says, nope, I don't believe he's guilty, then it would be a mistrial. The prosecutor can still move forward with another trial, second trial. However, that trial would be deemed a mistrial, and if they keep getting mistrials, 2, 3, 4, at some point, even though that they know he's guilty, they're going to have to stop moving with different trials.
So the Alex Murdaugh saga moved to the courtroom a few short months after SLED slapped the cuffs on him, and the country tuned in to watch, myself included. After all, he is the connected man everyone almost expected to get away with murder. 2 murders, in fact. He's gotten away with years of financial crimes against his own clients, embezzled funds from his own law firm to support a lifestyle he couldn't afford otherwise. He dug himself and his family further in crippling debt with his drug and gambling addiction. His defense team said at one point during the trial that in the height of his addiction, Alec was spending $50,000 a week on pills.
That honestly is a bit unrealistic. $50,000 is a lot of money.
I can't even comprehend that kind of money to spend on pills. He was a challenge, I think, for his defense team. They were convinced that they could beat the murder charges, though. I bet now, hindsight 2020, they probably wish they'd taken some more time to come up with a better, more solid strategy of how to defend his I don't knows and I can't remember statements he gave to the cops in 3 separate interviews. During the trial, I thought the defense for most of the time didn't take the prosecution serious enough. In their minds, the other team didn't have a winnable case. And to their credit, there's no DNA linking Alex Murdaugh to the murders of Paul and Maggie. Take a moment. Hear it again. No DNA linking Alex Murdaugh to Paul and Maggie. In your experience as a law enforcement who've taken part in criminal trials, how hard it is to win a case without the DNA, or in some cases, there's nobody.
Well, DNA isn't the end-all, solve-all evidence, as some may believe. There is actually a lot of evidence needed to link and trace the defendant to the victim. So, yes, having DNA evidence would be helpful, but even in this case, he can already prove why he was on scene. He already claimed to have shot a firearm with his son Paul before the murders. So there's going to be, if they found any gunshot residue on him, he has an excuse.
He has a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, he has a reasonable doubt. That's all he needs. He has blood on his truck, steering wheel. Well, he can explain that away too. He went back to grab a shotgun for
fear.
Some unknown reason, out of fear. He would have blood on him. He would have his DNA on them. He already explained away the whole phone thing. Oh, I went up there to maybe do something and put it back. So if it
what is the something, we don't know.
Yeah, which makes
he never explained what he wanted with Paul's phone. That he reached over, grabbed it, and then put it back where it belonged.
Thinking maybe, that was very strange. So getting back to the original question, circumstantial evidence is pretty much what most cases rely on. Sure, if you have video surveillance, it's more than circumstantial. You have pretty much proof right there. But without that, you have to get a lot of information, a lot of evidence connecting the defendant to the victim. So, yes, it can be hard sometimes. Other times, it can be pretty easy. And I think the prosecutors did an excellent job here gathering evidence.
They didn't have a gun or guns with his fingerprints, no blood from the bodies on him. Remember, in that first video of the cop arriving at Moselle on the night of the murders, Alex's clothes were clean, too clean, as other detectives and the rest of us have commented. Again, no blood or muck on him. Even after he told detective he tried to revive or touch Paul, didn't touch Maggie. So going back, the defense had that angle going on for them. But the problem, I think it was, Alex Murdaugh was a very unlikable. His financial crimes were uncovered and were out there in the open when his trial kicked off.
Yeah, as you can hear firsthand from Alec himself, it's true. He preyed on people of lesser economical standing than him. People in bad situations, even juveniles, looking for a way up or help with their traumatic experience. He took everything from them. One example is the son of Gloria Sutherfield, who worked for the Murdaugh for 2 decades. If you want to know about her and her story, it's on our website. We have a podcast about her. Alec would rob his clients blind while looking them in the eye, even though he claimed to have not during the trial. And they thanked him for it because they thought he was honest, that he was giving them everything they deserved. So by the time his trial rolls out, not a lot of sympathy for him was going around. First up is the prosecution to present their case against Alec. And yes, they didn't have DNA linking him directly to the bodies, but the prosecutors had other convincing evidence. They had GPS data, OnStar data. They had information on both on Paul's and Maggie's phone showing when it turned on, how many steps they've taken, as well as Alec, how many steps he's taken as well. They spoke with Blanca. They spoke with his mother's healthcare worker. They gathered all this information. They put together quite the compelling case against Alec. But today, this podcast, we're going to go right into the examination of Alec. So now that Alec is on stand, all of this evidence was presented against him. He has all this information. The defense had time to look through it, pick out a timeline, and try to figure out what they can do to make it look like there was some sort of reasonable doubt that he's not the one who did it. So they start off hard. They start off hot. They start off by being very graphic in the way that they spoke about the killings of both Alex's son Paul and wife Maggie, almost to the point of trying to show the jurors a father couldn't do this. Multiple gunshot wounds, 2 weapons. How can a loving father, somebody who cares for their family, do something so graphic?
And apparently Maggie and Alec had this fairy tale marriage.
According to Alec, they did. That's correct. During the whole testimony, they had all the evidence presented against them. So pretty much it was just a rundown of speaking to Alec and attempts to get ahead of everything. So they would talk about the tree incident. And all of a sudden he now has a story of when he changed. Right, so if you remember in our last podcast, we spoke about the third interrogation where he didn't know when he changed. He asked the detective, what time did it look like that video was taken?
Yeah, he didn't know if the video was taken that day.
Yeah, he didn't know. But now, tonight, during the trial,
He'd remembered it.
He remembered. He went back home after Maggie arrived home and Paul was out at the shop.
I guess you remember a lot of things if you're staring at life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Yeah. According to him, he was sweaty. He remembers playing with Paul and he was messing around with the tree. It was a fruit tree. He actually knew what type of tree it was this time. And it did happen that night. He knew for sure. He went back, he took a shower, and he changed. What a coincidence. So that was him getting ahead of the changing of the clothing. Because if you remember, he didn't remember changing clothes at night. Or he did remember. He didn't know that the detectives knew. So then he goes over eating at the house. He doesn't know where Paul is. He could have been there. He could have not been there. Again, a vague story because he really didn't want to get into all the details because it doesn't make him look good. He admitted to lying. This is the key point that we presented in the last podcast. He now states that he admits to lying. he did go down with Paul and Maggie to the kennels. He did drive down with them. They drove down first. Originally, Maggie asked him to go. He said no. So Paul and Maggie went down to the kennels alone. He then decided, oh, yep, I should go down there. He states that he goes down there in his golf cart. He sees the dogs run around, grabs a chicken, takes the chicken, puts it up on top of a crate or something of the sorts. Doesn't know what he talks to Maggie about. Is down there for a total of, I think it was 3 minutes. Then leaves.
Very specific this time around.
Very specific. And he knows he has to be in that timeline.
The first time, he didn't know if he was with Paul for 20 minutes or 2 hours, but he was there at the kennels with him
driving
for
around.
3 minutes.
Yep, he knew for sure.
3 glorious minutes.
Because the defense was able to do math, and as the prosecutor showed, when their phones were never opened again, it was around 8:49. That was barely enough time for him to drive down there, do this whole thing with the dog and the chicken, and his voice to be caught in the phone video audio that was supposed to be sent to Rogan.
Rogan is one of Paul's best friends.
Right. And for him to leave. So he had a specific amount of time allocated to present in front of the jury to show, hey, it wasn't me. I went down there only for a couple minutes and I left back home to take a nap before I went to see my mother.
Less than 10-minute nap, I think. What it turns out to be if you do the math, according to his own timeline.
According to him, yes. And he actually says something that really sticks out to me, and I think it's a manner of his guilt getting to him. Even on stand, he said, I would never intentionally do anything to either one of them. So I find that word intentionally important, because it's almost like he said, or is admitting to doing it, but he didn't really mean it. And I think he's trying to blame his whole drug addiction, because he again goes over all the drugs he's been taking over the last months, years, ever since some incident happened back in college.
Yeah, he's had a full-blown drug addiction or pill addiction for a really long time.
Yeah, and he says, I would never intentionally do anything to either one of them. And that's just such a strange choice of a word. Because I would, if it was my family, I would say I would never do anything to any of them.
What I find interesting is the whole phone data that the prosecution presented. I think it was very CSI, very cool and techy. And they could tell how he held the phone, how far he walked, and pinpointing the phone all over the place. At some point, they presented that he had stopped by a wooded area, and they were, I guess, thinking that he disposed the guns in that area. And he said, oh, no, I didn't. My phone dropped in the car, and I stopped to look for it. And I thought that was kind of interesting gotcha for the prosecution.
Very interesting. They were able to show when the phone flipped, when it was flipped back, tried to unlock, open, when text messages were read. It was very, very pinpoint information in which I think Alec was not ready for, or the defense. So what evidence do you believe that the defense presented that really helped their case and hurt the prosecution? And why?
I said give me a break when he started to cry for Mags and Paul. To me, it was very rehearsed. It felt that way. And it was because of all the 3 interviews I watched before his trial. I find myself thinking he can't give a straight answer to anything. You don't want to be this person, but you try to put yourself in his shoes as a grieving husband and father, and I couldn't believe he didn't know how long he drove around with his son. And how did Maggie and Paul got to the kennels? He didn't have an answer for that. Or why was Alex going for his son's phone before he gave Maggie CPR? Or he never tried to give Maggie CPR. Not evidence, but a witness actually. Buster Murdaugh testified in his father's trial. Was the biggest win for me. He came across as loving towards him. He admitted his father had an addiction. The family was somewhat aware of it. Alex Murdaugh apparently checked in rehab at some point in 2018 and had a few relapses. Buster, in my eyes, won his father some sympathy from the jury. He won some sympathy from me. And even though Buster didn't witness the murders, he gave some context of his father's action that night. A big thing in the trial was Alex changing his clothes. Why do it if not trying to dispose of evidence? Prosecution asked. To that, Buster said his dad often took showers because it was hot and he sweat a lot. I mean, it could be they live down in South Carolina. It does get very hot and humid. So if the defense was trying to sow doubt in the jury's mind, I think they managed to do some of it with Buster, but Alex Murdaugh taking the stand in his own defense did not do him any favors. I think it hurt him and he couldn't come back from it. What do you think?
You know, Jolene, I think he thought he was smarter than what he was. I think his vague answers to him have worked again and again on his helpless victims for fraud, that he thought it could work again on the jury and the prosecution. However, the prosecution, they were on fire. They did excellent. So they start off with hours, I think it was around 3 hours, talking about his fraudulent activity, how awful of a person he was, the types of victims he was taking money from. They presented phone times, they showed him what time he got home, and the only thing he could say is pretty much any question that didn't work in his favor, I can't dispute that, or I won't dispute that. Which is just such a strange way of speaking in a court case when you're testifying about your son and your wife being murdered.
In your own defense.
In your own defense, it's almost like he was playing the game, the civil game that he's so used to, where he was a lawyer and not the actual defendant.
Yeah, this is my turf. This is my courtroom. I know the rules better than you, pretty much saying to the prosecution. But it backfired for him.
Right. So they go into the times. They talk about Alec driving down to the kennel. They went on and on about him lying about it multiple times, showing various clips from the 3 interviews and interrogations, and even the 911 tape, showing that he began the lies before he ever talked to anyone. That he knew what he was going to say before he was questioned about it. Prosecution brings out a great point. When Alex Murdaugh got down to the kennels, he asked, what did he talk to Maggie about? And guess what? He didn't know. He didn't know. No, I wouldn't know. And prosecution brings up the point that he knows he dropped a phone between the center console and his seat, which is approximately 1 minute at the time where they believed he disposed of evidence, but he doesn't know the last conversation he had with his wife.
But he knows that he was there for 3 minutes.
Yeah, he knows the time frame. Oh, I was just down there for a couple of minutes. Oh, well, what did you guys talk about that was so quick? Oh, I don't know.
He knew that he took a nap. Less than 10 minutes.
Yeah, so at 8:45 and 45 seconds is when that video clip from the kennel ends. The one that was supposed to be sent to Rogan, but never was. He says he leaves less than 1 minute later, and he wouldn't even concede to that. So pretty much they're giving him time frames of minutes and seconds of how long he would have been down there, and he would never concede to it. Just, I won't dispute it. So another key point is that earlier in the investigation, they asked him if Maggie was going to go to his mother's with him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he called her before he left to see if she wanted to come. And prosecution brings up the point that, alright, you were just down there before you left, 10 to 15 minutes later. You talked to her for less than, 2 minutes? Did you ask her if she wanted to go to your mother's with you? He couldn't remember. So you think he would say, hey, I think I plan on going to my mother's. Do you want to come with me before going home? Or at the very least, before he went down there, it's about a minute travel. He could have drove down there and asked her personally. So then they show that Maggie's and Paul's phone both lock around 8:49ish. There's a couple more steps that were taken though. So when I say lock, I mean all the messages. It was never unlocked after 8:49. So you could still move around with the phone. It will still show steps, but it was never unlocked. So at 8:49 was the last time it was locked or unlocked. So Maggie's phone takes some mysterious steps at 8:53, and then it stops moving. It's thrown in the woods somewhere, disposed of. But here's the key. At 9:02 to 9:06, prosecution showed that Alec took 283 steps, which is multiple more steps than he's ever taken in the last 3 hours. Right? So it doesn't make any sense. So they questioned him on that, and he says, I was just getting ready to see my mother. Okay, well, what did you do? I don't know. I just was getting ready. Alright, so you took these amount of steps. Go through the process of how you got ready. I was just getting ready, I don't know. So he couldn't even come up with a lie saying that, oh, I had to get my pants in the other room, then I was running there, then there, and there. He just didn't know.
Well, let's put a pin in this. Do you think it was the defense failure in not preparing him well enough to take the stand? Because they knew what evidence the prosecution would have presented. They knew prosecution had all this phone data. And he didn't do any favors to himself being on the stand. So, but during prep, before you go to trial, you do get to sit down with your client and you do get to go over the case step by step, and it just seems that he was very unprepared. So I guess, do you think he was just such a bad witness, liar, con man, or do you think the defense just didn't do their job, or a combination of both?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. However, I will give the defense a little credit. Alec has weaved so many lies that it's pretty hard, even if they practice and prepared, it's pretty hard to keep all of them straight. I do believe this one would have been an easy one. They could have just said, hey, make sure at this time, just come up with something, or tell them the truth, as they would say. I don't think they would advocate for lying. But at that time, don't you think you were running from room to room trying to find your wallet or your phone, or maybe not your phone or your keys? Yeah. You know, that might be important to say. But he didn't. He didn't know. And then it was brought up that Alec actually never took his phone down to the kennels. And this is what showed to me premeditation.
Mm-hmm.
He left his phone purposely at the house. And if you remember, he was, to him, or his statement was, he was never at the kennels. So he went down there, murdered them, went back, and his plan was to show, hey, I was home the whole day, look at my phone records, I told you in interview 1/interrogation 1, everything's on my phone.
But it was that video Paul took that really got him in.
That video was everything. That was the key evidence that really reeled him in to guilty. So then they go into Alec making various phone calls, calling different people at different times. To me, all it was him time stamping an alibi.
And he makes all the phone calls after the bodies are discovered and he's called 911. Is that what you mean by making
No, he's calling on the way to his mother's, a bunch of people.
Right, okay.
He's doing something funky there. He drops his phone allegedly. He calls his housekeeper before he goes in. He's lying about how long he was there for. I don't think he was expecting his OnStar data to be so accurate. He stops in the parking lot at a weird spot that doesn't really make sense. And he drives back and calls a bunch of other people. But the conversations are about 2 minutes. For each person he would call or get a hold of, he would have like a 2-minute conversation, which I find very strange. Sure, if you're going to someone's house or you're going to see your mother and you want to say, hey, I'm going to go see Mom today, you don't have to worry about it, you can do next week, that's fine. But he's going to multiple people, and they're all short, just time-stamped phone calls to prove to anybody that hey, I have an alibi. I was talking to these people. I was doing this, that. Everybody's testimonies showing that, you know, Alec, your story's really not adding up. You you're not really wiggling away from everything as you may think you are. But so he gets back to the house, then he drives down to the kennel because he can't find Maggie or Paul, or what he will say, Mags and Papa, which he never said in any of the interviews except when he was on trial on the stand. So when he gets down there, he gives the same spew of what he did. There are still some concerning things that prosecution brings up, such as when did he go to the body? He's saying that he did immediately. Other times he's saying that he went back to the truck. You know, everything. It just he didn't have a story straight. For a lawyer, he was very bad
All over the map.
at planning this. Yes. But here's one thing that was really interesting to me, and I wish it could have been proven, but it wasn't, is that around the time where Alec grabbed Paul's phone, and this is actually disturbing to me, it appeared that the phone was attempted to be used via Face ID to be unlocked.
At that time, Paul was already dead.
Yes, I mean, this is well past when he was deceased.
So I guess the unanswered question is, did Alex Murdaugh try to use his dead son's face to unlock the phone to get to that video?
Because actually, I forgot to mention something. If you haven't watched the trials, there was a text message that would have been shown on Paul's screen of Rogan asking him for the video, saying, "Hey, you might want to take a video or have my puppy sit down, get a video, or send me a picture." And I'm sure that scared Alec. So he's like, "Oh, let me get in there.
His perfect plan.
Yeah, I don't have the ID or the passcode. Let me use my son's face, which was shot in the back of the head, and see if I can unlock it." Which that is very disturbing to me.
Yeah, I agree. That's disturbing.
So let me ask you a question, Jolene. When do you believe, during this whole investigation, when did you feel as though Alec was the main suspect?
Oh, I think he was the main suspect. When do I think he became a suspect?
Yes.
In my mind, just following the news coverage, in my mind, Alex Murdaugh became a suspect when I read the story and heard the 911 call of him calling in somebody trying to murder him or attempted to kill him, and he was on the side of the road, not too far away from his own property. At that point, we already knew the story that Maggie and Paul were shot. We already started to hear some of the financial crimes, and then all of a sudden, somebody's trying to shoot this person. Immediately, I thought to myself, he is involved somehow in this. He killed his family over something. And I think not long after, the police really started to dig into Alex Murdaugh and probably bring him in for a third interview.
So that's a great point. Him attempting to plan his own death for monetary gain for his son was definitely a key point. But if I'm just looking at the videos and the interrogations, what really stuck out to me as him being the lead suspect was two statements. When he said he tried to grab Paul's phone thinking he could do something, then no, and put it back. And when he said he called Rogan, Paul's friend, after finding out that his wife and son was murdered. I'm talking, I think he called his brother right after, maybe somebody else, but Rogan was like one of the first three. His son's friend is one of the first three people you will call.
Yeah.
Minutes after you find them. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Why would you be calling your kids friends?
Yeah. What do you guys think about that? When do you guys find, or when did you find Alec to be a lead suspect in your mind? What really stuck out to you to say, hey, yeah, this guy's not right. Something's wrong with him?
How did you think the prosecution did? Did they manage to convince you he was guilty based only on the evidence they laid out in front of the judge and the jury?
I believe the prosecution did an excellent job. You know, if you think about life and your even your individual circle of friends and family, 12 people have varying opinions on criminals, crime. Some are very lenient enablers, some are really hard. So the fact that they were able to convince 12 jurors in a pretty quick amount of time shows that they did an excellent job. I mean, going back to SLED, they did an exceptional job grabbing all this information. They knew it was top priority. They got all of this evidence that was within the phones, which most of it was because of the phone.
The phone that he handed. So slick was the detective from SLED. He was like, "Can I get your phone?" And Alec was like, "Oh, sure. Here's my phone. Here's my data.
Yeah, grab
Take
all the
it."
grab all the timestamps.
Yeah.
And I forgot to mention, Alec actually deleted a couple phone calls from his phone prior to handing over to SLED, which is strange because you think he would have known as a lawyer who's used phone evidence before that it's not going to be deleted.
I think we've established that when it came to law,
Yeah.
Alec practiced a different brand of law.
It reminds me of cases that I deal with. Is you will go and talk to a quote-unquote victim, and you will look at their text messages. This is just something without even subpoenaing it or grabbing a warrant. And you'll look through the text, and the other person is answering a question or responding to something, but their text bubble is deleted. So it's just, they just don't think that you're going to notice stuff like that. When you do, it really throws them off. They're like, oh no, I did text them. I just deleted it because some reason that doesn't make sense.
So the prosecution went up first, and in their closing argument, they said to the jury, "Don't let him fool you too." That was powerful. They lean into the fact that Alex Murdaugh is a serial liar who lied to everyone who trusted him, and I think "don't let him fool you" was the punchline to stick, grew legs, and led to conviction.
And the defense, as unenthusiastic as they were, followed up with the fact that Alex Murdaugh didn't have any blood on him, and if you shot someone, 2 people in this case, there should have been a lot of blood on him. His attorney also went after the prosecution's lack of motive. Why? Alex Murdaugh repeated to the jury and pointed to the prosecutors. They couldn't explain why Alec would all of a sudden kill his wife and son. Instead, as they were leading up to the entire time, the defense tried to play the addiction game, to feel sorry for him. It's not him. It's these other lies over the various years was because of his drug addiction. It's not who he is. He went on stand here. He admitted to all of his fraudulent behavior, but he didn't kill his son and his wife.
The jury came back in less than 3 hours with a verdict.
Guilty.
Guilty. What's your thoughts on the trial? Which side did better? If you were on the jury, does the lack of physical evidence like DNA make you doubt the cops' investigation? Leave us a comment.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Crime Room.
Till the next time.
Till the next time. Hey, you just listened to another amazing episode of The Crime Room. If you want to listen to more episodes, stop by thecrimeroom.com. And if you really like us and our work, you can become a supporter. For only $3 a month, you will receive access to a bonus podcast episode, a monthly members-only newsletter, and for our most dedicated subscribers, Jolene and I will answer a crime-related question submitted by you. Thanks for your support, true crime fans.